Orthodoxy in Appalachia, where I am highlighting the lives of Orthodox Christians living in this region of the United States. Today I am bringing to you an interview I did with Michael Cacic. Michael and his wife Christine, we go to church together at St. Nicholas. I interviewed his wife last year. You can find her episode on this channel. It's titled From Roman Catholicism to the Orthodox Church with Christine Cacic, so you can hear her story as well. They're just very interesting people. Michael is a historian, and so I enjoy talking about history with him as well. This unique prayer service that he's going to talk about, it's called a Serbian Slava. It is distinct to the Serbian Orthodox people. I have found it really fascinating to learn about in the last few years. And so he's going to tell more of his history today about how he grew up in the church and ended up back in West Virginia, as well as the history of this very beautiful and unique prayer service. Please enjoy. Michael, thank you for taking the time for this today.
Sure.
Really appreciate it. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in West Virginia.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in Hancock County, West Virginia, up on the northern panhandle. Weirton was a booming steel town at the time. You know, the mill actually employed 15,000 people. But around 1980, the world kind of started catching up to it. You know, more and more places were producing steel. There was foreign steel dumping, and the mill just started a steady decline. So I reluctantly gave up my dreams of being a steel worker, like my dad and my uncles and grandfather had all done, and went to WVU, where I would meet my current, my only wife. And I had switched over to Soviet studies while I was there. I originally went for business, but quickly found out that that just didn't excite me in any way. And got into history, really loved history, but there's only so much you can do with a history degree. So a Soviet studies degree, I thought, had something more applicable. So Chris was originally from the DC area. She had graduated a year before me, and I graduated just in time to see the Soviet Union go away. So that kind of left me with, okay, now what do I do? Well, IT was booming in the DC area, and I started taking courses through University of Maryland. But the IT market was so superheated by that time, I didn't even need to finish the second degree. I did about 25 hours and found employment, and that led to a 35-year career in DC, culminating in 15 years with the Department of Labor doing web design and management. We were planning to buy something in West Virginia. Anywhere in West Virginia would have been fine for me. Chris was a geology major, and she did a summer field camp here in Greenbrier County, and she fell in love with the area. So we started looking here. Well, we were looking at some places a little bit more to the east, but there was already a huge spillover from the DC area. So there were these really nice home developments, but they all had HOAs. And the last thing we wanted to deal with was anybody telling us what we could do with our land. So Greenbrier County became one of the things we insisted on. We had to own the mineral rights and the water rights. We didn't want to, have somebody else doing that. We didn't have a very good idea of what you could really get. So we were looking at too small of a piece of property to really build on. Most of the property around here is bigger than that. So after 2 years of looking, our real estate agent decided to throw our budget out the window and brought us to this piece of property, which is on 38.5 acres. And the log cabin, the original one, was built in 1850. And it was moved here around 1980 reassembled. Some new additions were added. So, it's got all the modern conveniences, modern kitchen, modern bathroom. And it was a little bit of a shock moving from a house with 3,600 square feet into a cabin of 1,200. But we've never looked back. We sit on the porch sometimes and say, can't believe we pulled this off. This is just beyond our wildest dreams.
It's beautiful out here. Very
And
peaceful.
the last 3 years of my work career, we were on full-time remote, at first due to COVID, but then they found out that the IT department, our production went up by 25% when we were working strictly from home. So they said, okay, it's permanent. As soon as they said that, we were like, we have no more reason to stay in the DC area. We sold our properties there, moved here. We used the money from our house sales to pay off the mortgage for this place. So we own it free and clear. In April of 2024, I formally retired from the federal government, and we kind of shifted to a little bit more intense activity on the homestead. We now raise chickens for eggs. We occasionally will raise additional meat birds, some of which we then sell to some of the local restaurants. We raise Cornish hens, and we do turkeys in the fall. So we're talking about expanding, but we can't agree on what we're going to go with. So we'll be kicking that around for a while.
So, Mike, what is a Slava? Tell us a little something about the history of this prayer service.
Well, the Slava is something that's unique to the Serbian Orthodox. We're the only Orthodox branch that uses this service. Oddly enough, it dates back to the pagan history of the Serbs, where they believed that every hearth, every home had a personal god that protected the family. And when the Christian missionaries were moving through the Balkans, they found that the Serbs didn't want to give that up. So what they proposed was, when they chrismated an entire family, they would choose the saint of that day to be this family's protector. And the Serbs were satisfied with that. But the Slava became a way of commemorating the family's personal saint. It's a huge tradition in Serbia. If it's your Slava, you can't refuse any guest walking by. You will invite them in. At the very least, give them a glass of wine, have maybe a meal if that's an appropriate time. But then the Slava prayer service is a unique set of prayers. You're going to recognize a lot of them in the way they're used. One of the things that is done in the name of the saint is to bless a special loaf of bread known as a kolač, which is only made for Slava, which the priest blesses, cuts the bottom not all the way through in the shape of a cross, blesses it with wine, and then the priest, the assembled family, godchildren, if any of those are present, will hold the bread up and slowly rotate it, while certain prayers, including Song of Isaiah, I think it's called, Rejoice, Isaiah, Virgin is with child. That's the third prayer that's done. At that point, the Slava is completed, with a few more litanies, of course, and then the bread is divided up and passed out to all of the guests. So a meal usually follows. Priest will bless that. We'll just give everybody lunch.
How wonderful. So hospitality is a big part of
Huge part.
service.
Yeah, the Serbs, especially the peasantry, have a reputation for their hospitality. They take it very seriously. When I was growing up, my dad wasn't a big one for keeping the Slava service, but occasionally we would travel to his hometown, which was Weirton, is 30 miles due west of Pittsburgh. His hometown, Youngwood, was about 30 miles east. So I would go up there, and his family would be holding the Slava, and they made it. It was a big deal.
How many people would be there at
Well,
those?
my
typically?
dad had, he was one of 8. So it would be, my dad and his brothers and sisters, their spouses, their children. It would be about 40
Wow.
plus people
Definitely a
in
house
the
full.
home. Oh, yeah, definitely.
So who is your family's patron saint? And tell us a little bit, are you cradle Orthodox, Mike? And how was this growing up?
Yeah, I was, baptized as an infant, chrismated in the Serbian Orthodox Church here in America. So it's a very ethnic church, which meant that a lot of the service was done in Old Slavonic. My parents were born here in America, but Serbian was their first language. It was spoken at home. And they were determined that their kids, and this was very common in the Serbian immigrant community, would learn English as their first and only language, because they wanted us to be Americans. Americans don't speak Serbian, And it also gave them a special language that they could use around the kids. The kids couldn't understand. They never had to spell words that we might not know. They could just carry on a full-blown conversation, and we would get so angry when we hear them going on, because we knew who they were talking about.
Yeah.
But that kind of created a bit of a barrier, because you're not really learning the full depth of Orthodoxy as a kid. That was also one of the things, the only converts that I ever knew growing up were people who had married a Serb. So there were a lot of Catholic wives in the parish, and they seemed to be the people most willing to step up to try to do Sunday school. But no one had kind of gone through some of the hard differences between Catholicism and Orthodoxy. So they'd be teaching us about original sin and the Immaculate Conception of Mary. Finding out that that wasn't part of our faith was kind of a shocker when I was an adult. One of the things that happens a lot with the ethnic parishes is the children don't remain Orthodox. And a lot of fall away in their teen years, which is, kind of a rebellious time in general. But I remember my one sister talking about growing up in the Serbian church, and she said, you have to stand up for a while, you have to sit down, you have to stand up for a lot of it, and there would be something going on up there that I couldn't understand, and it was long and tiresome, and I couldn't wait for it to be over. And she's like, yeah, that kind of encapsulated it. So when Chris and I decided to get married, neither one of us were church attending on a regular basis. We were dealing with planning a wedding in the DC area, which is notoriously expensive. Now, granted, this was in the late 80s, and at that time, we were told you can't get away with a wedding in this area for under $10,000. And we were like, we're just starting our new careers. We don't have that kind of money. Chris's dad had a long career as a meteorologist for the federal government, but he was a notorious tightwad, and he was very proud of that. So he was grumbling, and then was like, okay, where are we going to get married? And Chris had been raised Roman Catholic, but she'd completely fallen away. She had no adult connection with the church at all. So she asked me, well, when you were a kid, did you ever think of where you would get married? I said, yeah, I never thought of anywhere but my home parish. And she's like, would they marry us there? I said, oh, heck yeah. It'd be a big deal for the Serbian community back home. So she said, let's go with that. And then we later find out that the Roman Catholics fully recognize the Orthodox sacrament of marriage, but the Orthodox don't really recognize the Catholic. So that to Chris was just, another reason we should go with that, because it would be keeping both sides of the family happy. We got married, and the Serbs, the Serbian Orthodox, the way they do it, you have 3 meetings with your priest that you have to go and do, and it's about a 2-hour meeting each time. And if you skip one, they're not going to marry you.
Wow. Serious.
Because Chris was not a member of the Orthodox faith, our priest had to write a letter to the bishop of that diocese and get permission to marry her to an Orthodox Christian. And, Chris thought, oh, that's kind of neat. We got married, had a wonderful wedding, typical of the Serbs in that area. We had about 300 guests. It's the entire parish comes when one of their people are getting married. So
tight community. Community.
Very, very much so. I mean, growing up as a kid, I never saw a wedding under 300. I saw some up into the 500-600 range.
Wow. And
that's just not uncommon for that the Eastern European families in the Rust Belt, as it's now called. After the wedding, however, we'd been living our lives kind of outside of the church, so we weren't really getting right back into it. That changed when we were expecting the birth of our first daughter, Alexandra. We were kind of asking ourselves, how are we going to give this kid a moral grounding? Because, even though we weren't dedicated churchgoers, we both had our moral grounding in the Christian faith. That's where all the lessons came from. Those were the values we still held. So we find a parish in the D.C. area, St. Luke's in McLean, which had begun as a Serbian Orthodox parish, but there was a rift in the Serbian Orthodox faith around 1960 because the patriarch had decided to cut the American diocese up into 3 separate dioceses. And a lot of people thought the reason might have been because Bishop Dionysia was an outspoken critic of communism. And we knew the Belgrade patriarch, if he does the same, he's not going to be a living patriarch for very long. So this split the Serbian church in America. And that split remained almost 30 years. But during that time, the priest there, Father Milorad Milosevic, thought that the schismatic church was getting problematic in some of its teachings. Now, Father Milorad had started his seminary work in Serbia under now Saint Justin Popovic as his instructor. Father Nikolai Velimirovic also was one of his instructors. So Father gets a chance to defect, escapes into Greece, where he spends 6 months in a refugee camp because the Greeks were very suspicious of people crossing over from Yugoslavia. Was this an infiltration? Greece had, of course, had a civil war where the communists tried to take over, but they failed in that. Eventually, Father gets permission to emigrate to the United States, picks up his education with St. Vladimir's, which was then under the Russian Church. But they eventually were granted autonomy and became the Orthodox Church of America. And at that time, Father Milorad decided he should move the parish to them. So now we have this Serbian-rooted parish doing all English liturgies. Exactly what we were looking for. Now I'm getting all of the lessons in the readings in English, a language I understand, and Father Millerod had started what he called Orthodoxy 101, and it was for people in the parish to make sure that they were well grounded in the various elements of the Orthodox faith and the teachings. But now I'm getting these lessons as an adult, and they're starting to ring very, very true to me. And Chris was going along to these, so it's starting to have an effect on her as well. So by the time Alex is born, I'm in full communion with the OCA Church in McLean. I think we began doing the Slavas probably before Alexandra's second birthday. And it was, Father Millerod was very encouraging
He
of
would come
that.
to your house.
Yes. Yep. He would come into that's a big part of the priest who married us, Father Rade Merrick, encouraged us to do a Slava in the home, and he was very stern about and would invite the priest.
Okay, so I was under the impression you have to have a priest to do it, but you
To
don't
do the
have
service.
to.
You could celebrate it as a little bit more on the secular side. Maybe have the kolach there, but it's not going to be getting blessed.
Right.
And I've never actually attended one like that. We had Father Miller on for many years, coming to our house.
Who is your patron saint?
Our patron saint is Saint George, the trophy bearer, the wonder worker. His various titles he's known by. He was a Roman soldier, um, probably an officer, perhaps a centurion, or even higher up. But during the reign of Emperor Diocletian began persecuting the Christians, and George had come from a Christian family. So when the emperor insisted that his centurions all offer sacrifice to the idols, he refused. So Diocletian began persecuting him like he was doing with thousands of Christians across and torturing them. But uh, because of his status, uh, George's tortures were part of a public spectacle. And the way he endured these torments and refused to give up his faith began inspiring people who were witnessing it, including one of the emperor's wives, who declared herself to be a Christian. He had her executed immediately and redoubled his efforts on George, who, according to the legends, he would awake every morning healed. So the torments went for many, many days, and the effect of witnessing him do it started inspiring more and more Romans, including other centurions, to declare themselves to be Christians. So finally, Diocletian had enough, had George taken outside of the city and beheaded. And that was his martyrdom. And then later, during the Roman Christian crusades into the Middle East, somewhere, we think probably in Syria or Lebanon, that's where the village that tells of St. George coming to them and saving them from the dragon came from. And of course, the English crusaders take that back to England, so the flag of St. George is now part of their national identity. And it became kind of odd because in a lot of the Serbian icons of St. George, you don't see the dragon. It's not part of it. But in most of them, he will always be mounted on a horse and be slaying the dragon.
Why is it important to continue holding this service?
It is the celebration of when my family became Christian. So we're commemorating that starting point, and it's rejuvenation, renewal. Um, it's a reminder this is where we started. So we keep coming back to that moment, and it's like something unique, but we celebrate all the various feasts and fasts in the Orthodox faith, and it's a constant reminder that the church has been here, for 2 millennia, and it's not changing. We're sticking to those traditions and those teachings because we believe them to be the truth. It's also great to kind of share the Orthodox faith with non-Orthodox friends and even family members. We've always used it as pulling members of our current parish together in our home, and having that social, faith-based connection outside of the church is a big part of it, because we teach that your home church is your focus. We have our icon walls in our homes, and so having the parish come to us for this celebration is just a big connection, and it's very essential to the thing.
I love that. And that makes me wonder, have you had an opportunity to have maybe some of the local neighbors here that are not Orthodox come to a Slava? And if so, what has been their impressions?
They love hearing the prayers. Of course, most of the people who come are people who are Christians. Occasionally we'll get somebody who will want to come and see what it's all about. But once again, keeping with now the Serbian hospitality tradition, we'll do the Slava in the morning. We'll have lunch, socialize for a couple hours, and then people have things that they need to do. So at that time, we just go to a general open house, where now we kind of reach out to members of the community who aren't really interested in any of the religious aspects. So we have them come and enjoy a Serbian kind of holiday celebration. I do a lot of the ethnic foods, and we always serve Slivovic, which is a plum brandy that the Serbs favor. It's wonderful. We have, especially now we have this space. People bring their kids. Of course, they're West Virginia kids. They're all through the woods, and the moms have come up to do not climb on the outcrops, because some of them are high enough. If you fall, the kid will get hurt. So they tell them that's not permitted. But they love feeding the chickens. So the chickens eat very well during our Slavas.
So it's really about connection. Mm-hmm. And what time of year is the Slava held at the same time every year?
Yeah, because St. George is a very specific day. It's May 6th by the old calendar, which is how we grew up celebrating it in the Serbs, and it's April 23rd by the new calendar. So, of course, St. Nicholas now, we're on a new calendar. We usually go for that. They always tried to do the celebration to St. George as the first Saturday after Pascha. So that's worked out a couple of times. We've had to do, sometimes when Pascha's very late, we've had to do a fasting Slava. Mm. And at that time we were attending St. Mark in Bethesda, which was just an OCA church. And the priest there, Father Gregory Savchuk, used to love coming to our Slavas. He would brag on me, tell people, he's a Serb, you got to go to his Slava. But he enjoyed doing the service as well. That's one of the things I've found, that non-Serbian Orthodox priests are very willing to do this service, even though it's not part of their tradition. Yeah, once we had established our roots here in West Virginia, we began looking for an Orthodox church, and there were a couple around. We ended up going with St. Nicholas Antiochian Orthodox Church in Beckley, which is a good hour and 15 minutes away from us. But that wasn't even a point to be considered, as in D.C., the traffic guarantees you're going to be doing an hour commute minimum to get to a church, no matter what. And there you're sitting in traffic, so it's a lot worse. Of course, the first time we sit through liturgy and then get welcomed by Father Samuel, we knew we were connected. And it was funny because later Father Samuel, talking to Chris, said he looked out and saw us for the first time, and it came to him, they've found their home.
Wow.
Boy, that was spot on. So we've been attending there ever since. So that would have been early in 2022. So we've been going there, and Chris is getting more and more involved in the church, which has always been her calling. When we were attending St. Luke's in McLean, there was one Sunday, I'm not sure what happened, but the only members of the choir showed up were the choir director and one of our deep bass singers. So they're trying to carry it off on their own. And Chris says, okay, I think I could do this. It's like, okay. So she starts singing along. The choir director's head snaps around, here's what she's singing. Here's her pitch, gives them the big go for it. And Chris went and walked over and sang with the choir for the next year and a half. Then one Sunday, the choir director doesn't show up. He's having a medical emergency. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody knew. And the choir is in an absolute panic. But Chris was in the orchestra in junior high and high school, so she can read music. She knows what a conductor does and how to do it. She walks up, opens the choir director's books, looks at it for a few minutes, turns to the choir and says, "We got this." And she became the choir director.
Wow.
That, which Father Millerod noticed that he had to mention in his end announcements, we seem to have acquired a new choir director. Not that anyone told me.
Wow, glory to God.
Mm-hmm.
She was right there at the right place at the
Yeah.
right time.
So by the time we moved to St. Mark's, Chris was ready for a little bit of a break, because St. Mark's was a much bigger parish. And they had 4 choir directors. They actually rotated 40 people plus in the choir. I mean, attendance is usually in the hundreds there. So, yeah, she kind of took a little bit of a step back, but now she's, doing more and more at St. Nicholas, and she's the head of the women's group, Holy Myrrh Bearers there. And it's just become more and more a part of our lives. It was at St. Luke that Chris finally decided to convert to the Orthodox faith formally, and it was all triggered by, I believe, Alexandra one time asking her, "Why don't you take communion with us, Mom?" And Chris had always said she was looking for a sign. But, I think she mentioned this in her interview. A couple of weeks after that, we had gone home to Weirton, where there's a huge Serbian church picnic every year. And she's talking with Father Rade, and she gets to the point that she was always looking for a sign. And when she gets to that point about Alex, Father asked her, "What more of a sign are you looking for?" So that made the decision for her. Now, yeah, I couldn't imagine not being a part of the Orthodox faith and trying to bring it to my home. And the Slava gives me the perfect reason, the perfect excuse. And I get to cook all the Serbian food I grew up eating.